game. It's a rich thing.
What is going on, guys? Welcome back. In today's video I'm going to show you how simple it is to develop 3D games in Python using the Ursina game engine. And for that I'm going to structure the video in two parts. In the first part I'm going to show you the basics of the engine, so how to create objects, how to animate them, how to control stuff, how to load models, and so on. And in the second part we're going to take a look at a couple of sample projects provided by the developer team, and you're going to see how simple it is and how easy it is to actually develop something approximating a Minecraft clone or a 2D platformer using Ursina with very few lines of Python code. So I think it's quite interesting. Let us get right into it. And the first thing that you want to do is you want to open up CMD or the terminal of your choice, and you want to install Ursina using pip. So pip install Ursina like that. And once you have that, all you need to do is you need to say from Ursina import basically everything. Now, if you're working on an actual project, you should not use wildcard imports. They're not a good practice, but for a tutorial, for practicing, it's fine. So I'm going to do it here. Otherwise, of course, you want to do everything manually. So entity and Ursina and so on. I'm just going to use the wildcard import. And first of all, I want to create a simple application. So app is Ursina like that. And then we want to have, for the first example, a basic cube rotating all the time. So this is the first thing to want to build. And always think about this, how long it would take to build that in OpenGL from scratch, or to build that with a more complex framework. In Python with Ursina, it's actually quite simple. All we need to do is we need to say cube equals entity. The model of the entity is cube. The color is going to be color red for now. The texture is going to be white underscore cube. And the scale is going to be 2, basically scaling it up, making it larger. And all we need to do now is we need to define the update method here. This is basically what happens with every tick. And here we're going to say cube.rotation x equals cube.rotation x plus 0.25, for example. And then cube.rotation y equals cube.rotation y plus 0.5. And if we now want to run this, all we need to do is we need to say app.run. And we're essentially done. Now we can right click the Python file and see if this runs. There you go. And you can see that this is already an animation that we have here. So it's nothing fancy yet, but you can see how easy it is. You just create an entity and you rotate it, and that's it. This is how you build this one here. Now let's make it a little bit more interesting by adding some controls. So let's say we now have, let's call this the player. We're still going to have this being a cube. Let's change the color to, I don't know, blue or something. And we're going to just scale the y-axis so that it looks at least a little bit more like a player and less like a cube. It's still going to be a cube though. And essentially what we want to have here is we want to say, okay, player.x. So the x position of the player should be increased by the held keys. And in this case, we want to increase x, which means that we move it to the right, which means that D should be pressed to increase that. And we're going to increase by a factor of 0.1, so just a little bit. And essentially, we can do the same thing with the negative. So with minus, if we hold A, and we can basically copy these and change this to Y and use W for increasing and S for decreasing. And essentially we can also rotate. For example, we can say player.rotation x plus equals held keys, and held keys r times 5, for example, could be just a rotation here, just so we have some interaction. And already we have implemented controls. This is how you do it in Ursina. I can run this now, and we already have something approximating a game. Now, it doesn't do a lot, but as you can see here, this is the cube. If I now press D, it goes to the right. to the left, up, and you can see it's not two-dimensional, even though it might seem a little bit like that. If you pay attention, you can see how it actually is changing a little bit. I can also rotate it here, you can see, three-dimensionally. So I can already move this cube here. This is how simple it is with the Ursina game engine. Now, if I think that a cube is quite boring, because it is actually, I can also load objects from the internet. And actually, I have this prepared. Where is it? Videos prepared. Ursina tutorial. I have an object loaded. Where was it? Model object. I'm going to copy it now. You can download these from everywhere on the internet. There are a couple of websites where you can download these object files. Why do I need to open this now? I don't want to open this actually. What is it doing now? However, what you can do is you can just go to websites and download these object files, or you can also just download Blender files, so .blend files, if you have Blender installed. Because if you want to actually open up a blend file in the Ursina game engine, what you need to do is you need to have a Blender installation, because this is then going to use Blender to actually render this into your application. But you can also take it and convert it to an object file, which is, in my opinion, a better way. So I'm going to fix this lag here right now, and I'm going to come back to you. All right, so for some reason, copying this file crashed my PyCharm installation. I had to restart it. But essentially, you copy the file into some directory, and then instead of specifying cube, we specify the path to this object. So model.obj, because it's in the same directory. Otherwise, we would have to specify the full path. Now let's also remove the scale, and let's change blue to orange, because I think it's easier on the eyes. And when I now run this, we should have a person. There you go. So this is a model I downloaded from the internet. We can also rotate this person here. As you can see, I can move it around, of course, without animations. It's just a model itself. But you can see how easy all of this is done in Ursina. I just define the path to the object. I link the keys to certain actions, and that's it, right? I can just run the app, and this is how I can work with the Ursina game engine. Now, before we take a look at the sample projects of the developers, I want to show you how we can build a simple first-person experience, let's call it, because it's not actually a game. For that, we're going to need from Ursina.prefabs.first-person controller, we're going to import the first-person controller. And we're going to build a very simple game/experience where we're just going to have some blocks on the ground, and we're going to be able to walk on these, and then we're going to have one special block in the middle, and when we click it, it's going to change the texture. Just to show you the mechanics a little bit. So we're going to first say for z in range, and this is a little bit inspired by the Minecraft example. For z in range 10, for x in range 10 as well. We're going to lay out a couple of blocks. So we're going to say this is an entity, and we have a model being equal to cube. We have a color being equal to color.dark_gray. We have a collider being equal to box. This basically means that, yeah, we collide with it, so we can stand on it. Then we set ignore to true. We set the position based on where we are in the loop. So position equals a triple of x, 0, and z. So y stays 0. The parent of all this is the scene. And then the origin underscore y equals 0.5. The basic texture is white underscore cube again. So this is basically just the ground that we're walking on. There you go. This is just generating a couple of blocks. And then inside of those, or on top of those, we want to create a special box, a texture box, I'm going to call it. So texture box is going to extend from button, because button basically means that we can click it and something happens. And we're going to have the init function here, so the basic constructor. We're going to have a position. By default, this position is going to be 5 to 5. So in the center and a little bit above that. And we're going to call the super constructor, so super init. And we're going to pass a couple of parameters again. So parent is going to be the scene. The position is going to be the position that we passed, in this case the default value probably. Then the model is going to be cube, because it's still a box. The origin is going to be also 0.5. The texture is going to be, by default, the texture.jpg. Now, I downloaded a couple of images here. You can choose whatever you want. The texture JPEG by default is this here, so a little bit of a trippy texture. And I'm going to change it with each click. So the color is going to be color.color001. That's basically the constructor. And now we want to also define the texture list and the texture choice. So the texture underscore choice, self.texture choice, is going to be 0 by default. And then we're going to say self.textures is going to be texture.jpg. Then what do we have? Wood.jpg, stones.jpg, and blue.jpg. You can just download any images from the internet. And then we're going to have the input function. This input function is what happens when we click on this box. And what we want to do here is we want to say, okay, if self.hovered, so if we're hovering over the box, and if the key is equal to left mouse down, because we can also right click, but this triggers now on left click, then we're going to say self.texture choice plus equals 1 self.texture choice modulo equals length of the texture, so that we don't go over the boundaries, so we can basically iterate through the list like a cycle. And then self.textures, and then self.texture that we have chosen at the moment is going to be self.textures self.texture choice, like this. And all we need to do now is we need to create the texture box down here, and then we need to add a player. So the player is going to be the first person controller. Now, it is a little bit more complicated than what we saw in the first examples, but still, this is not a lot of code, and we have actually something that hopefully works. So we have a first-person experience that we can move around blocks, we can do certain things. Okay, now we have a problem, or at least, I am walking on the blocks, but I don't see them. But when I click on this here with the left mouse button, you can see that it changes the texture. Now I should be able to fall down, so probably it's something with the texture of the buttons. Do we have a problem there? White cube. Oh, text. This is texture, of course. There you go. So now we have these blocks here. I can jump, as you can see. I can walk, I can click, and I can jump off. And you can see this actually works. So this is all with just a few lines of Python code. And now we're going to look at a couple of very impressive examples. So for the sample projects, we're not going to code them from scratch. As I mentioned, these are examples provided by the developers of the Ursina game engine in their repository. But I think they're quite interesting to look at because you can see that with very few lines of code, you can have some pretty impressive results. For example, this Tic Tac Toe game here, it's 2D, not 3D, but still it shows you that the Ursina game engine can also be used for something like that. You basically click on one field, you get an O here, you get an X here, an O here, an X here, an O here, and then you can win the game like that. And all of this is done in 68 lines of code with a lot of blank lines. And yeah, it's actually quite simple. All you do here is essentially you create a camera, which is just focusing the board. You have the player entity, you have the cursor. In order to click on the boxes, you have a background. You generate the board, and then essentially you have this onClick function that performs the click and checks for victory. And if you have won, then you're going to see this win message. Nothing complicated. I think it is even more complex to implement this with Pygame, and obviously way more complicated to implement this in another language that is, or another framework that is not Python based, but this is actually quite simple. Then we also have something very basic like an inventory for a role-playing game. Again, just a prototype, but you can have individual slots and individual items that you can drag around. You can create more items and all that. Can exchange positions. Very simple, but also this thing doesn't have a lot of lines of code. More than the Tic Tac Toe game, but still doesn't have a lot of code in it. So basically setting up, what is this, the camera or the inventory itself. Then we have functions for the logic like appending and finding a free spot. We have this draggable instance here. So yeah, basically a good template for an inventory, but these are the less impressive examples. More impressive, I think, is this platformer and the Minecraft clone. So the platformer is essentially a 2D platformer. Again, you can add some more interesting sprites here. So instead of having this orange block, you can also add, I don't know, a character with a running animation. But essentially, you can jump onto these blocks. Now, I don't think that this generated level here is winnable because it doesn't seem like we can reach the blocks. But this thing here is a good prototype for a potential game. You can see a lot of comments, you can see a lot of blank lines, and a lot of just binding keys. But still, the whole thing has 61 lines of code. So here we bind gamepad to keyboard, and here we have just a player instance. Here we create I think these are the blocks that we can jump on. And here we have the ground. And that's basically all you need. So very simple. We have here, I think, the platformer controller 2D template. So things like that make developing games quite easy. Besides that, this is probably the most interesting one, the Minecraft clone. Now, it's not actually a Minecraft clone because we don't have different block types. But if we take a look at that, this is the ground, and we can now left click and place blocks. And we can also right click and remove these blocks. Now, of course, in Minecraft, we have way more complicated mechanics like world generation and different tools and PvP and PvE and life and hunger and all that. But the basic structure of planting blocks and adding multiple block types using scrolling isn't too difficult. But you can see that it's actually quite simple. And this has actually the fewest lines of code. If we open that, this has 48 lines of code with a huge comment disclaimer up here. So essentially we have a first-person controller, we have the voxel, which is the 3D pixel. We have the input, which basically says if it's a left click, spawn a new voxel. If it's a right click, destroy it. And here we generate just the ground. Very simple, and this is a basis for a Minecraft clone. And I think last but not least, what's interesting to look at is this bars example, which is a bit like I don't know, a settings UI, you could say. So you can drag these things here, and then the bar sizes change, and then you can randomize that. So it's also interesting for building UIs. 68 lines of code. But yeah, these are a couple of examples, and I think it's quite interesting to look into those. If you are into 3D game development and you want to do some side projects for fun, I think this is a very interesting solution because Pygame is more complex and more suited for 2D games. Python in general is not the game development language, so I would recommend if you're really into game development, you go into C# and Unity or C++ and Unreal Engine and all that. But this can be a nice alternative for hobby developers, 3D game developers that do it mainly for fun. So that's it for today's video. Hope you enjoyed and hope you learned something. If so, let me know by hitting the like button and leaving a comment in the comment section down below. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell to not miss a single future video for free. Other than that, thank you very much for watching. See you in the next video, and